Claire had never believed in fate, but standing in front of the wrought iron gate of the Wendell estate, she felt something unnatural coil in her chest. The address was correct. The gravel path beyond the gate stretched uphill through a tunnel of maple trees, their late autumn leaves carpeting the road in burnt orange and blood red. The house was hidden from view, but something about the air was heavy, like stepping into a room where someone had just been crying. She pushed open the gate, her backpack slung tight over her shoulder, her fingers stiff from the cold. It was her first day at the new job, and she was already 20 minutes early. The agency had described the position in vague terms: part-time cleaning staff, light duties, strictly weekday mornings. It sounded ideal, especially for someone like Claire, who had been spiraling since her mother died 6 months earlier. Her shoes crunched over the gravel, each step feeling louder than the last. The mansion came into view at the top of the hill, a 3-story colonial revival structure, its pale stone facade blanketed in ivy. Dormant roses lined the front walkway. Claire paused at the bottom of the stone steps, taking in the sheer size of it. This place had money in its bones. The front door creaked open before she could knock. A woman in her 70s appeared, her posture erect, her hair pinned into a meticulous silver bun. She wore a charcoal dress and no smile. "You're Claire?" she asked, voice clipped and cool. "Yes, from Goldbridge Staffing." The woman nodded. "I'm Martha. I've been with the Wendells for 52 years. Come in." The warmth of the house hit Claire like a blanket. The interior smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Wooden floors stretched out beneath antique rugs, and oil paintings hung in thick golden frames along the hallway. The silence was absolute, but not peaceful, more like a museum after dark. "No one else lives here now?" Claire asked, trying to make conversation. "Not anymore," Martha replied. "The house is maintained for the estate. You'll be cleaning the east wing, mainly the parlor, library, and dining room. You'll find all your supplies in the butler's pantry. No one's allowed upstairs." Claire nodded, trying to suppress the urge to ask why. She followed Martha through a set of tall double doors into the parlor, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture covered in white cloths, and a grand fireplace flanked by dusty bookcases. And there, above the fireplace, hung the painting. Claire froze. It was a large, formal portrait of a man seated in a leather chair, his hands resting on a cane. The backdrop was a muted gray, the kind often used in mid-century portraiture. His expression was stoic, his eyes pale blue and piercing, his jawline strong and familiar. So familiar that Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Who is that?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Martha glanced up without much interest. "Howard Wendell, master of the house. The painting was done in 1978. Claire stared at the plaque beneath the frame. Howard Wendell, 1978. Her knees felt weak. It wasn't just that the man looked like her father. He looked exactly like Robert Hammond. Same eyes, same nose, even the same dimple in the chin. Her father, who vanished when she was 5 years old and never came back. Her mother had never offered much explanation, only that he'd left and that they were better off without him. Claire turned away, shaking her head, willing the image to leave her mind. It had to be a coincidence. People looked alike all the time, but the resemblance had shaken her in a way she couldn't explain. Martha didn't seem to notice her reaction. "You'll begin with dusting and vacuuming. The parlor hasn't been used in years, but it's to be kept in pristine condition." Claire forced herself to nod, took the vacuum from the pantry, and began her work. Her hands moved mechanically, but her mind kept drifting back to the portrait. She glanced at it repeatedly, finding new details each time. The watch on his wrist. Her father had worn one just like it. The small scar near the left temple. Robert had a similar mark from a childhood accident, according to her mother. As the morning wore on, Claire felt her sense of reality shift. She was not just cleaning a stranger's house. She was standing in a room that seemed to echo a past she barely understood. That face on the wall wasn't just familiar. It was part of her. When her shift ended at noon, she left the mansion in a daze. The wind had picked up, sending leaves skittering across the path. Claire got into her car and sat for a long time, staring back at the house. The windows reflected the gray sky, giving nothing away. Later that night, she sat at her small kitchen table. The image of the portrait burned into her brain. She pulled out the only photograph she had of her father, taken when he was in his 20s. The resemblance was chilling. She flipped the photo over. Her mother had written in faded ink, "Robert, summer of 1980. Claire's hands trembled. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. But now she had a thread. And for the first time since her mother's funeral, she felt awake. She decided she would return the next day, not just to clean, but to look, quietly, carefully. The house was old. Houses like that remembered things. And she intended to listen. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm, but Claire's mind refused to settle. Each morning, she drove up the winding road to Wendell Estate with a new sense of purpose hidden behind her routine. She greeted Martha with polite indifference, retrieved her cleaning supplies, and dutifully followed the tasks laid out for her. But as soon as the opportunity arose, when Martha retrieved the kitchen or made one of her long, hushed phone calls, Claire strayed from her assignments, eyes sharp for anything the house might reveal. She started with the ground floor, moving methodically through the unused rooms that still bore the weight of decades. The Wendells had clearly been a family of wealth and tradition. The furniture was solid and ornate, the wallpaper delicate with age, the shelves filled with leather-bound volumes untouched by modernity. Yet something about the house felt unfinished, as if the air still held echoes of conversations abruptly silenced. One morning, while dusting the library, Claire noticed a seam in the wallpaper near a bookcase that didn't match the others. On closer inspection, she realized the seam outlined a hidden door. It took some pressure, but eventually it clicked open with a faint groan. Inside was a narrow corridor lined with shelves, filled with old tax documents, ledgers, and yellowing envelopes sealed with wax. The air was dry, tinged with mildew and age, but Claire pressed forward, careful not to disturb too much at once. Near the back, she found a stack of old boxes, labeled in fading marker. Winter 1992, Estate Expenses 1989, Private Correspondence. One box was unmarked. She opened it slowly and found photographs, a few disorganized journals, and, at the bottom, a dust-covered VHS tape with a peeling label that read simply, Christmas 1992. The writing was familiar. She didn't recognize the hand itself, but the curves of the letters, the way the C curled back into the past like a question mark. It made her stomach clench. She glanced toward the door. Silence. Instead of taking the tape to the television room upstairs, which Martha had explicitly marked off-limits, Claire slipped it into her bag, along with one of the journals. She closed the hidden door and returned to the library, heart racing, pretending to organize a shelf of encyclopedias until her hands stopped trembling. That night, she borrowed an old VCR from her neighbor, claiming she wanted to digitize some of her late mother's home videos. She plugged it in, adjusted the tracking until the screen stopped flickering, and inserted the tape. The image opened on a warmly lit living room decorated for Christmas. Children's laughter filled the room. A tall man entered the frame, holding a little girl in his arms. Claire leaned forward. The man was the same one from the portrait, Howard Wendell, but younger, livelier, more relaxed. He laughed as the girl kissed his cheek and ran off-screen. A woman, elegant and blonde, called from the kitchen, her voice light with joy. Then, a young man stepped into view. He couldn't have been more than 16, with dark brown hair and sharp features that Claire recognized instantly. She paused the tape. It was her father. There was no doubt now. The way he moved, the sound of his laugh, even the subtle arch of his eyebrow. These were fragments of her childhood, memories she thought were lost to time. She let the tape play. The young man, Robert, handed presents to 2 children and hugged the older woman. At one point, he turned the camera and said, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," followed by a wink. Claire sat frozen, watching the family she never knew she had. She watched the rest of the tape in silence. There were no dramatic revelations, no arguments or secrets laid bare, just the ordinariness of a wealthy family on a winter morning, exchanging gifts, sipping coffee, sharing smiles. But beneath that surface, Claire sensed the weight of something unsaid. There was a stiffness in her father's posture, a distance in his eyes. He had been part of that world once, but something had driven him out of it, something strong enough to make him vanish. The journal was no easier to navigate. It was filled with notes in a neat but hurried script, most of them observations about estate business, family tensions, and social engagements. Names she didn't recognize appeared frequently: Gregory, Eleanor, Aunt Sybil. But scattered between the financial reports and guest lists were entries written in a more personal tone. Frustrations about tradition, references to arguments, mentions of a boy who refuses to obey, and eventually vague but chilling lines like, "Robert no longer understands the weight of our name. He will throw it all away for that woman." Claire closed the journal. Her mother. They had never talked about the family her father came from. He had always dismissed the subject with a single sentence: "They were never really my people." She had never questioned it, until now. The next morning, Claire entered the mansion with renewed urgency. She bypassed her usual routine and went straight to the basement, an area she had yet to explore. The steps creaked under her feet, and the air grew colder with each descent. The basement was enormous, divided into storage rooms lined with shelves and trunks. She moved slowly, searching through boxes of outdated electronics, china sets, and dust-covered portraits wrapped in cloth. In one back corner, she found a trunk secured with a rusted padlock. It wasn't hard to break. The metal gave way with a sharp crack. Inside were more photographs, old newspaper clippings, and letters. The letters were written in a shaky hand, most likely Howard Wendell's, and addressed to my son. Claire read the first one, dated August of 1984. "You will regret your defiance. This woman you've chosen is not one of us. She has no place in this house, in this family. I cannot accept a bastard grandchild born of such rebellion. If you leave now, do not expect a return." She felt her throat tighten. These were not just empty words. They were a door slamming shut. It was clearer now. Her father hadn't simply left. He had been cast out, and he had chosen her mother over all of it, over wealth, legacy, and power, over everything. Claire packed the letters and the rest of the contents into her bag. She was no longer afraid of Martha or of being discovered. The past was unraveling, thread by thread, and she would follow it to the end wherever it led. As she locked the basement door behind her, she whispered into the silence, "I know who you are now, Dad. I know what you gave up." And for the first time, she felt closer to him than ever before. Claire didn't return to the mansion for 2 days. Not because she was afraid, but because she needed time to absorb what she had discovered. The letters from Howard Wendell had stayed on her kitchen table, weighed down by a coffee mug and her unanswered questions. She reread them multiple times, tried to extract meaning from between the lines, searching for something redeeming in the words of a man who had cut his own son out of his life. Each word, each cruel sentence, only made her more resolute. Her father had not abandoned her. He had escaped something unbearable. On the third morning, Claire returned to the Wendell estate early, arriving just after sunrise. The sky was overcast, casting a pale gray hue over the grounds, and the trees were skeletal now, stripped of their leaves. She walked into the house without knocking, something Martha would surely comment on, but she didn't care. Her steps were quiet but purposeful. The silence of the house felt different now, as if it were aware of her. Martha was in the kitchen, rinsing something in the sink. She glanced up, a flicker of surprise in her expression, but she said nothing at first. Claire hovered by the doorway, unsure how to begin. "I found some of Howard's old letters," she finally said. Martha turned off the water and dried her hands slowly. "There are a lot of old letters in this house. These were in the basement, in a locked trunk." The older woman looked up at that. Her face didn't change, but Claire sensed a shift, subtle but unmistakable. A moment passed in silence. "I need to ask you something," Claire continued, more firmly this time. Was he Robert Wendell?" Martha hesitated, her shoulders stiffening as though bracing for a blow. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch the room itself, she nodded once. It wasn't just confirmation, it was surrender. Claire sat down, suddenly unsure whether she wanted to hear the answer to the next question forming in her mind. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Why did he hide it from us? Martha sat opposite her, carefully folding the towel in her lap. Robert was a good boy, bright, strong-willed, but too much heart. That was his undoing in this family. Claire leaned in. What happened? It began when he was still a teenager. Your grandfather had plans for him. Prep school, Ivy League, then straight into the family firm. But Robert, he had his own ideas. He liked writing music, fixing things. He worked with the groundskeepers for fun, spent time with the staff. Howard saw it as rebellion. Then he met your mother. You knew her? Claire asked, stunned. Only once. Briefly. She came here when Robert insisted on introducing her. She was not what they expected. Kind, warm, but working class. Howard hated her on sight. Eleanor, Robert's mother, was too afraid to speak against him. When your mother became pregnant, Howard lost his mind. Claire closed her eyes. She had imagined so many scenarios over the years, but none quite like this. He threatened to disown him if he didn't end the relationship. Said no Wendell child would grow up in that kind of home. Robert didn't even argue. He packed his things and left the same night. Howard erased him, took down his pictures, stopped speaking his name. Anyone who asked was told Robert had gone abroad. Some believed it. Claire's hands were cold, but he stayed nearby. I don't know where he went. No one did. He was just gone. For a long moment, the kitchen fell into silence. Then Claire reached into her bag and pulled out the photograph of her father, the one she had carried for years, folded and worn. She placed it on the table between them. This is him. Robert, my dad. Martha stared at the photo for a long time, then reached out with one trembling hand and gently touched the corner. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were wet. He looked so much like Eleanor, she said softly. I always hoped he found peace, that he was happy wherever he went. Claire swallowed hard. We didn't have much, but he loved us. He loved me. I wish he'd told me the truth. Martha stood and moved toward a drawer in the pantry. She opened it slowly and retrieved a worn envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. She brought it back and handed it to Claire. This was never sent. I found it in Eleanor's room after she passed, hidden inside her jewelry box. Addressed to Robert. I didn't know what to do with it, but maybe now it belongs with you. Claire turned the envelope in her hands. The paper was fragile, but the handwriting elegant, unmistakably feminine. She slipped it into her pocket without reading it. She wanted to be alone for that. The next day, Claire returned to the mansion, but this time not as a cleaner. She told Martha she needed to speak with someone about this estate. After a moment's consideration, Martha gave her the name of a local attorney who had managed the Wendell family's affair for decades. Charles Redley, a quiet man in his 60s who still worked out a small office in downtown Greenfield. His receptionist let her in without question, and Claire explained her connection as best she could. Redley listened in silence, nodding slowly as she laid out what she had discovered. About her father, the letters, the tapes, the journals. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. You understand, he said slowly, that if what you're saying is true, you may be entitled to part of the Wendell estate. Howard passed away 6 months ago. His assets were divided among his known heirs, namely his brother's children. But if Robert was alive at the time of Howard's death, and if he has a living descendant, things could change. Claire sat still. The idea of inheritance had not occurred to her until that moment. It felt distant, secondary to everything else. I don't want money, she said. I want answers. Redley gave a faint smile. Answers are sometimes more expensive than money, especially when families are involved. He agreed to look into the legal aspects and advised Claire to prepare for resistance. The Wendells are not known for their generosity, he warned. If you intend to assert a claim, you will be contested. Claire left his office more determined than ever. The truth had started to surface, but she could feel the resistance gathering, pressing it around her like a tide. Gregory Wendell's name had come up in one of the journals. He was a cousin, wealthy, entitled, rumored to be the de facto head of the family now. She didn't know him yet, but she suspected he would not welcome her presence. But that didn't matter. She had spent her whole life in the dark. Now, even if it cost her peace, she would walk straight into the storm. And for the first time in years, she knew exactly who she was fighting for. Claire awoke the morning after her meeting with Charles Redley with a soft tremor in her chest. Neither of fear nor of excitement, but of awareness. She had stepped into a world much larger than she had ever permitted herself to consider, and yet the world she now inhabited was unmistakably part of her. The Wendell estate, with its hidden secrets and elegant decay, had become the arena where her father's story would be told at last. That day, she returned to the house with equal parts trepidation and purpose. Arriving earlier than usual, before the sun had fully climbed, she pushed open the front door and stepped into the silence. She paused in the foyer, letting the stillness of the house press in around her, as though the walls themselves held their breath in expectation. Martha was not yet in sight, and Claire took the opportunity to make her way to the parlor. The portrait of Howard Wendell met her gaze, and for a moment she merely stood beneath it, absorbing all that lingered in the quiet. This was the house where she almost belonged, though she had lived her entire life believing otherwise. Her reverie was broken by the soft echo of footsteps on the oak floor. Martha emerged from a side corridor. Her face was as composed as ever, but the slight slackening of her expression told Claire that she, too, sensed a shift. They exchanged brief greetings, and Claire silently offered the envelope Eleanor had hidden. Martha accepted it, eyes moist as she nodded her understanding. Claire took up her cleaning duties, but with a new rhythm in her movements, edges sharper, senses tuned. That evening, after her shift ended, she remained at the mansion until the sun's final rays filtered through the curtains and vanished, leaving the rooms cloaked in shadow. Alone with her reflections, she retrieved the sealed envelope from her pocket. The wax imprint was cracked, the paper brittle, but the handwriting inside flowed with the familiar arches of her mother's. She drew in a breath and opened it. The letter was brief but seismic in weight. Her mother's script trembled on the paper. "If you are reading this, my love, I am no longer there to guide you. I found your grandfather's words harsh and unloving, and those same words broke my heart. I could not bear to tell you the truth, for I feared it would leave you untethered. But this house and these people were never safe for us. You carry all I ever hoped for. If you find your way here, know that you were loved, that your father sacrificed his place for your future. I pray you understand in the way I did." The letter ended with her mother's final flourish, a line drawn to the closing phrase, so that only the truth remained in bold clarity. Claire lowered the letter, her hands steady but her lungs tight. The world she had known was small, and it had held her close. But now the broader shape of her lineage, fraught with loss and betrayal and love, demanded that she step forward. She folded the note and tucked it back into her bag, then closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel, for the first time in years, the weight of belonging. Her next move was practical. She visited Greenfields Courthouse, where Charles Redley's research had uncovered probate records confirming Howard Wendell's death and the absence of any claim from Robert, or any mention of him at all, in the will. The estate had passed entirely to Howard's nephews, the children of his brother. That was the legal status. But Claire's father had been alive when the will was penned. She was a living descendant, a rightful heir. The foundation of her case stood, and that legal footing galvanized her resolve. Redley advised that proceedings needed to begin quietly. He would draft the initial documents establishing her status. He cautioned, however, that opening the inheritance question would inevitably ripple through the Wendell family. Claire understood that confrontation was inevitable, but she would not retreat. The moment of tension arrived faster than she anticipated. A week later, she received a polite but frosty letter from a firm that represented the Wendell Trust. It had landed among her daily bills and notices, striking her as absurdly mundane for something so serious. It warned her in formal terms not to proceed with any false claims or to contact family members directly. The tone was polite, but uncompromising. Claire exhaled, the letter shaking in her hand. If she had any lingering doubts, they evaporated then. That afternoon, she returned to mansion under the pretense of cleaning, but intent on more than dusting. In the parlor, where the portrait loomed, she found Martha seated in a low armchair, her hands folded in her lap. Claire approached quietly. "They've sent a warning," she said, holding up the cold cream-colored envelope. Martha watched her, expression tight. They always did things the proper way. Quietly, "I'm not trying to destroy the family. I just want the truth about my father, about his place here." The older woman nodded, a single slow motion of agreement. She got to her feet, pale light filtering across her face. "You are his daughter. The rest is history. If the house would talk, it would ask you to remember him." Claire felt tears in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me so much." Martha exhaled. "You are already part of that story." She hesitated. "If you need anything, old papers, names, dates, there is someone who might help. A secretary who worked for Howard in the late 70s. Lives just outside Greenfield. She may know details not recorded in any ledger." Claire nodded. "Could you tell her I'll reach out?" Martha took a step back. "You do what you must." The older woman's eyes glimmered, not judgment, but sorrow tempered with steadfastness. Claire realized how deep the scars ran, how many silent lives had been shaped by secrets too painful to speak aloud. Now, though she had given voice to those wounds, she stood beneath the portrait and pressed a palm gently against a frame, feeling, somehow, that she was closing a circle he had forced open. As Claire left that night, the house felt charged, full of expectation, of reckoning. She had made her move, and the game had begun. Her path forward would demand courage, strategic clarity, and compassion. She carried, between journals, letters, and birthright, the legacy of a man who had chosen love over legacy. Claire did not know where the struggle would lead her, but she would walk it and honor him as she did. The past had been silent. Now it thundered in her veins, and she would answer its call. The wind had shifted. Claire could feel in the way people looked at her now. At the market, at the gas station, at the quiet local cafe where she used to sit unnoticed. Greenfield had always been the kind of town where whispers travel faster than cars, and in the wake of her petition through Redley's office, the Wendell name had begun surfacing in ways it hadn't in years. She wasn't just a cleaning girl anymore. She was a question mark attached to a legacy others had believed closed. And while she had not sought attention, she no longer fled from it. The weight of the Wendell name, once distant and abstract, now pressed against her shoulders with strange familiarity. She carried it differently, not as privilege or power, but as proof of a truth that refused to remain buried. It didn't take long before Gregory Wendell made his presence known. He didn't come in person at first, but through intermediaries, lawyers, private correspondence, and a curt legal brief disputing the legitimacy of Claire's claim. He was polished, efficient, and vicious in subtle ways. The brief did not outright deny Robert Wendell's paternity, but questioned the documentation surrounding Claire's own birth, the legality of her mother's relationship with Robert, and the timing of any possible inheritance eligibility. In short, it was the modern language of erasure. Redley had expected this and prepared accordingly. With his guidance, Claire submitted the official DNA request through the court. She had already retrieved her father's personal items, an old hairbrush, carefully preserved by her mother, and the locket he had worn when she was a child. These, combined with the genetic material already filed from Howard Wendell's estate, provided the basis for a conclusive answer. The test was administered, the samples sealed, and then came the waiting. Those days were long. Claire returned to the mansion occasionally, now less to clean and more to reflect. The staff had been reduced further in recent years, and most of the remaining caretakers kept to themselves. Martha had grown quieter too, but never cold. One afternoon, Claire found her in a small drawing room by the east windows, knitting slowly while the wind battered the window panes. "They'll try to protect what they believe is theirs," Martha said, without preamble. They were raised on the idea that legacy belongs only to the obedient. Claire sat down opposite her, hands clasped. What if they still win? Martha looked up, then let them keep their money. You have something they can't take, your father's truth. The DNA results arrived 10 days later. Claire received a call while sitting in her car outside the courthouse, unsure whether to go in. Redley's voice was firm but calm. It's definitive. 99.9% match. You are Howard Wendell's granddaughter. Claire didn't respond right away. She stared out the windshield at the falling leaves, gold and rust spiraling across the hood like feathers. Her heart didn't leap. There was no triumph, no catharsis, only a stillness that sank into her chest and stayed there. The truth she had carried silently for weeks was now fact, and that fact would have consequences. News of the DNA confirmation spread quickly. Gregory requested a meeting through his attorneys. Redley advised against it, but Claire insisted. She wanted to see the face of the man who had tried to erase her existence with the stroke of a pen. The meeting was scheduled in a private conference room at a law office downtown. Claire arrived first, calm, collected, dressed in a dark green coat that had belonged to her mother. It felt like armor. Gregory entered moments later. He was in his early 40s, well-groomed, with cold eyes that scanned her like a document. He extended a hand, which she refused to take. "You're a lot like him," he said without sitting. Claire remained still. "You wouldn't know. You never met him." He didn't flinch. "I knew of him. We all did. He was the cautionary tale our parents used at dinner." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And yet here I am." "Gregory, finally Saturday. What exactly do you want?" It was the question everyone had been too careful to ask directly. Claire leaned forward, her voice level. "I want you to understand something. I didn't come here to take anything. I'm not interested in your money or the name on the gate. I just wanted to know the truth. My father didn't abandon me. He was exiled. I have a right to know where I came from." Gregory studied her, suspicion flickering behind his composed facade. "Then why go through the courts? Why the DNA tests? Why not just knock on the door and ask politely?" "Because polite doesn't work with men like you," Claire answered. "You have buried this like everything else." The room went quiet. After a long moment, Gregory pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside were documents withdrawing the family's formal objection to her status. He didn't offer a reason, but Claire sensed it wasn't guilt. It was inevitability. The test had closed the question. "There's no trust to claim," he said bluntly. "Howard's assets were distributed, and what's left is tied up in long-term holdings." "I don't want a settlement," Claire replied. He narrowed his eyes. "So what do you want?" Claire stood. "For once in your life, maybe you should think about what that says about you, not about me." She left without another word. The next week, Claire returned to the mansion one last time. Martha met her at the door with an expression that was neither surprise nor relief, only a quiet acceptance. They sat in the parlor for a long time. Claire showed her the letter confirming the DNA results and the withdrawal of the challenge. Martha nodded once, and then reached for something in the drawer beside her chair, a small silver key. "Third floor, north wing. You had a room there once. No one's been in since." Claire took the key and climbed the stairs alone. The third floor was different from the rest, dustier, more forgotten. She found the door at the end of the hallway and unlocked it. Inside was a time capsule. The room was reserved, almost untouched. A guitar rested against the wall, a stack of old notebooks, a sweater draped over the back of a chair. The space smelled faintly of wood and paper, and something older, nostalgia perhaps, or absence. She sat on the bed, ran her fingers over the quilt, and for a long time she said nothing. No tears, no words, just presence. Before she left, she pulled a photo from her coat pocket, a picture of her father holding her as a baby. She set it on the desk beneath the window and walked out, leaving the door ajar. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt whole.